Kia ora tātou nau mai, haere mai. Good morning. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Sharon Lloyd. I'm the General Manager of the Circle here in New Zealand. I have to say I am so excited to be here. It's our first networking and face-to-face event since the beginning of March, and you all look amazing. So good in 3D, and it's so cool to see so many of you here, and thank you for coming out today and braving the Auckland weather. Now, just quickly for the housekeeping, the bathrooms are over to the left of the foyer, and in case of an emergency, please follow the instructions of the venue staff who will get us safely to where we need to be. I'd like to thank Dentons Kensington Swan and our host today, Hayden Wilson, for having us. Always a pleasure to be here, and of course especially today. I would like to make a special welcome and acknowledgement to Sir Jim Mackay and the Honourable Craig Knowles. Welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I just wanted to also mention, of course, you all know that the Circle had, as many other businesses, a chance to pivot early in March, which was the key word then. We're now talking about hybrid, which is exciting. But many of you joined us on our online platform and the briefings that we had, and it didn't go unnoticed, and we do thank you so much for your continued support. We want to build a program into the future that takes into account what you need to continue connectivity, to continue business networking face-to-face, growing our economy. So please talk to us and let us know how we can help you do that. We will be doing a mix of these physical face-to-face briefings, which we love, of course, but we'll continue the online model as well. Minister Robertson, finally to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. Of course, also a guest of our online platform and our post-budget address, and it's great to see you live in person as well, and thank you for being our guest of honour at the first event. I think I speak for everyone here when we say congratulations on what you've achieved and the speed of everything that you've delivered and the continued transparency with us. It's been really brilliant, and I've especially enjoyed working with your office, so thank you for being here with us today. I'll now hand over to Hayden Wilson, a partner here at Dentons Kensington Swan, who will formally introduce the Minister and get us going. Thank you, Hayden.
That's right. Thank you, Sharon, and thanks to the Circle for partnering with us on this event. Inga mana, inga reo, e rauranga tira mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora everyone, and welcome to Dentons Kensington Swan. As Sharon said, my name's Hayden, and I lead Dentons Kensington Swan's government and litigation practices, and I want to echo Sharon's pleasure in seeing you all in 3D and being here on the Circle's first in-person briefing since COVID-19 arrived on our shores, and it's also a very particular pleasure for me to be able to welcome Grant Robertson, Minister of Finance, Minister of Sport and Recreation, one of his most important portfolios if you ask him, Minister of Arts, Culture and Heritage, and the Minister responsible for the Earthquake Commission. The fact that we are even able to be holding this in-person briefing here in New Zealand is amazing when you look at what's happening around the world, and it's a testament to what New Zealand has done to respond to the health crisis that COVID-19 presented. And Grant's present challenge is in leading New Zealand's response to the other aspect of the challenge that COVID-19 presents to the world, a fundamental and broad-ranging economic shock to us all. And Grant is obviously leading the government's response to that economic crisis, and he's doing that while he's also auditioning to keep the job after September. And the global nature of that response of the crisis has been of particular interest to us here at Dentons. We have 180 offices in cities across the world, and we've been working with you, and our teams around the world have been working with people like you to help businesses manage and respond to the crisis, and now to try and shift our focus towards the recovery, what we've been calling here the big reset for our economy. And I know you'll all be looking forward very much to Grant's opening remarks and the interactive discussion. Grant's promised that his remarks are going to be funnier than his general debate speech last week, which got quite a lot of attention. So I will hand over now to you, Minister, for some opening remarks, and then there will be hopefully a very interactive Q&A discussion. We've got some roving mics. Sharon is going to moderate that discussion, but I'd encourage you all to take advantage of the opportunity to ask the Minister the things that you would like to ask him, and to tell him the things that you'd like him to know. So thank you all for being here.
Kia ora ngā mihi nui ki koutou katoa, e ngā mana e ngā reo rau rangatirama, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Greetings everybody. Thank you Hayden for that introduction. Hayden and I go way back actually, and so I was watching out for any little digs in case I had to come back with our shared student political past, which we have. It's very in nowadays to be a former student politician. We've got one as the leader of the opposition. We've got myself here as Finance Minister, and so yeah, a couple just sitting behind us there too. So it's a very in thing at the moment to be that. But Hayden, thanks for the invitation. I didn't need to use any of those old stories from Dunedin. I'm also very pleased, Sharon, to be here in 3D, although given what I experienced during lockdown with the lockdown 5 kilo bulge, I'm probably here in 4D rather than 3D. So we've got to work on that. But it's great to be here, and thanks to the Circle for your ongoing commitment to dialogue, I think is probably the thing I'd say best. And I enjoyed the time we had in the virtual world working with the Circle. It's now become de rigueur in our cabinet to, the thing we'll remember from lockdown is you're on mute, Damien. So Damien O'Connor still hasn't quite mastered the art of Zoom yet, but he's getting there. He's getting there. Look, I am going to be faithful to my commitment that I'm just going to make introductory remarks, and I look around the room and I see a lot of people who've heard me speak on quite a few occasions and are very well informed, so I don't need to laboriously work my way through the budget or the initiatives that we've got in place. So I'll perhaps just make 2 or 3 observations about where we are as a country and a world, and no doubt they'll be rendered irrelevant by events that take place this afternoon, because that's just the pattern of where we are at the moment. The first thing I'd say is to echo the point that both Sharon and Hayden have made, which is the incredible effort that all New Zealanders have put in to mean that we have an event like this today. And we only need to look across the Tasman to see what can happen in the state of Victoria. And many of you, like me, will have friends and family who live in Melbourne. It's a place I've loved to visit over the years, and it's a real warning and a very clear signal about what can go wrong and how quickly things can go backwards with this virus. And so we think of our friends in Melbourne at this time, but also recognise what an enormous privilege it is that we are in the position we are now. And that is the first thing I want to say, which is to thank you all, because there's nothing a government can do that can make happen what happened in New Zealand without the full cooperation of the people of this country, and that happened. I was at an event not all that dissimilar to this in early March, talking with a business person who said they didn't think New Zealanders had the discipline to go through a lockdown and succeed, and we completely comprehensively proved that wrong. And I think it is a huge tribute to New Zealand and New Zealanders that we have put ourselves in this incredibly strong position that we now are in. So thank you, and I do genuinely mean that on behalf of the government. Related to that is just the situation that we have now with the virus. It took 6 days for the globe to go from 10 million to 11 million infections. That happened earlier in the week. 6 days, 1 million infections. And as any of you who follow the virus closely will know, the flow-on effect of that to, unfortunately, death rates and the long-term consequences around the world are enormous. So this virus is growing, it is not slowing. And that means that, again, the privileged position we're in is something that we should be grateful for, but it also indicates the length of time that we are going to be needing to deal with this virus. And obviously, if I start to look at it from an economic perspective, that is a real issue for us around how long as a planet we're going to be in a position of having to deal with this. So the story of COVID-19 has not yet fully been told. And if anyone ever wants to know why, when we set out our stall at the budget and said we've got a $50 billion fund, but we're only allocating $30 billion of it, it's because nobody can tell you. No politician, no epidemiologist can tell you where this ends. And so I will stand by the fact that even though it sounds a strange thing to say that when you've just spent $30 billion, I'm still being very careful and cautious with the management of our books, but I am. Because that money is there so that we can be comfortable that we have a buffer for whatever might come over the coming months. And that approach is one that I very, very strongly stand by. The second thing I really wanted to talk about was just kind of where we are from an economic or fiscal point of view. And to indicate that what I've had the Treasury do over the last few months is try and update their scenarios. The people who do forecasting in the Treasury are very, very particular about the difference between a scenario and a forecast. Forecasts are the things they put in their formal documents, and they have a tendency to move markets, so we have to be very careful about how we use that language. But we have looked at a range of scenarios for what all of this means for New Zealand from an economic and fiscal perspective. And you will recall, I think it was April, we produced some big picture scenarios, some of which had some pretty frightening numbers attached to them. Then we had the forecasts that were actually in the budget. We've now, Treasury's now developed some further scenarios, and that'll then lead up to the pre-election fiscal update just before the election, which will have more formal updated forecasts. In terms of the updated scenarios, it's a game of two halves. So from a New Zealand economic perspective, things are better than we expected in the May budget. And you'll all know that because economic activity under level 1 has been significantly better than many people forecast it. We keep an eye on a lot of real-time data, and for example, heavy and light traffic movements, retail card sales. Coming into winter, so electricity use is not such a great proxy any longer, but we are seeing activity up at and above pre-COVID levels. Now the question remains, is it a sugar hit, as many say, or is it going to sustain itself? Thus far it is sustaining itself at a level that we hadn't expected. In many cases there's some pretty simple reasoning for that. People who might have been spending $30,000 on an overseas trip are now spending that inside New Zealand on a range of different activities. But also there was a bit of pent-up demand there, but it's also a positive sign in the sense that people are feeling confident enough to do that kind of spending. We're yet to see the formal unemployment numbers, but tracking closely the applications that we're having for our COVID income relief payment and for the main benefits, we are seeing clearly a spike there, but not to the extent that had been predicted. So when you put all of that together, the Treasury is saying that by and large they think the GDP drop won't be quite as severe, the unemployment increase won't be quite as severe. The banks, and there's a few bank people here I think today, the banks are ranging around in their unemployment predictions for the year or for the quarter, the third quarter where most people are worried about it, peaking at maybe more like 8% rather than 10, or in fact one bank's got it as low as 6. So those are positive signs for the economy. There's been some unusual ones too, the wage subsidy extension. The uptake of that has not quite been as large as we expected it to be, and that's a sign that people are generating a bit more revenue than they thought. By no means suggesting this is easy. I acknowledge Michael Barnett here from the Auckland Chamber. There are a lot of smaller businesses still finding it really, really tough within that environment, but it is a better scenario than had been predicted. The second half of that game is the international environment, where the projections are getting worse by the day. And so the latest numbers out of the IMF and OECD both see a much sharper fall in GDP globally. It's around about 5% in both of them. But if you look at advanced economies within that, you're talking more like 10%, particularly out of Europe. The US is obviously a country really grappling with the virus. And so all of that leads to that problem that we often have, and probably the last time I talked to a few of you, we were still debating the China-US trade dispute. whichever thing it is, that has a massive impact on New Zealand and on our ability to generate income here in our country. So the upshot is, because this is what economists do, on the one hand, on the other, it ends up being a roundabout net where we were in May, but probably better in the short term and tougher in the medium and long term as a result of the balance of those two parts of the scenario. From our perspective, which brings me to the third part of what I wanted to say before we get into questions. From our perspective, those changing scenarios don't particularly alter our strategy. Our focus has been on the three parts of our plan: respond, recover and rebuild. The response part of our plan goes on, and I think you'll all see the fact that these are not distinct phases, they overlap one another. So the response phase, which was characterised by a big boost in health spending by the original wage subsidy scheme, that carries on, but now within the context of the border. And so we are putting significant resource into ensuring our borders are secure, that our quarantine and our managed isolation facilities are operating at the level that you would all want them to. There is no playbook, as you've heard many times. New Zealand has never closed its borders in this way. We've never locked the country down before. We've never also operated a quarantine arrangement at the border. So it's an iterative process as we grow our capacity and our awareness of what's happening there. But that part of our response phase goes on and will require significant resources in order to make sure it meets the standards we want it to. But our focus has clearly moved to the recovery and the rebuild phases. And for us, they are very much centred around about, 5 concepts that the Prime Minister talked about in her speech on Sunday. I want to just highlight a couple of those. Obviously, job creation and job retention is at the core of that. And so massive investments into infrastructure, into construction of housing, making sure that we're investing in things that, as Joseph Stiglitz calls it, do double duty. So this is the idea of where you actually are creating work but also doing something else that is good for the long term of our country. And the environmental jobs package is a great example of that, where we can employ 10, 11,000 people into things that are actually improving the quality of our waterways, getting rid of pests, making sure we look after our conservation estate. So looking for those opportunities in the recovery and the rebuild to start to deal with some of our longer term challenges that we have, and that's a good example of it within that space there. As we move further in towards the rebuild part of it, this is where people are looking for the big grand vision of where New Zealand might go. The first thing I'd say in response to that is that the challenges and opportunities in the New Zealand economy didn't somehow or other disappear when COVID came along. In some ways they were exacerbated, but they're still there. And so the idea and the focus that we've had that our economy needs to be more productive, more sustainable and more inclusive remains our focus. And the productivity side of that I can get into in some depth, but it relates to the plan the Prime Minister raised, which is around lifting our skill level, and the investment that we've made in apprenticeships and training, I believe, will be one of the lasting legacies of our response. The fact that we now have free apprenticeships and free trade training in areas all the way from construction and manufacturing through to mental health care and community care is a massive down payment on the future of New Zealand. One of the reasons we have struggled for decades with productivity is our failure to invest in skills and training at the level that we need to. And that is the down payment we made in this budget, with about $1.5 billion going into it. Equally the same with infrastructure and the big spend there, which has been another holdback on our productivity. The other area that I'll just mention, and before we come to questions, is around what we do to continue our international connections. Because in this strange world of a closed border, we remain absolutely committed, and it is essential that New Zealand deepens it and broadens its international connections. And there is no contradiction in that statement. It's a problem for us to manage how we do that, but we must do it. And so the budget focused around a pretty significant boost, around $250 million to NZTE to lift its market presence, develop its digital capability, and support businesses to be able to export to markets they can't get to physically. It's a huge challenge, but NZTE is stepping up to it and doing a really, really good job of it. It's also the reason why, in the middle of all of this, we established the first stage of the negotiations with the UK on a free trade deal. because we must keep that moving forward. Those international connections, again, have a role in why we've been challenged on productivity over the last few years, and it's critically important for us that we push that out. And yes, eventually we do return to a situation where we have international tourists coming here, where we have the international education sector working again. We are working and planning on that every single day, but we won't do it till it's safe. We won't do it until we can assure New Zealanders that we can manage that in a way that locks in the gains that we've made. This is a long game that we're playing here, and while I appreciate the pressure that puts on particular sectors, I think it is in our best interest as a country that we keep front and centre the protection of that border and the security and safety of New Zealanders. In the meantime, we're going to be developing more of the sector-specific strategies that you've seen with tourism into those other areas that are affected by that border change. But I don't think if you go out and you surveyed 1,000 New Zealanders, you would find many, if any, who would say to you they want to see those borders open up right now. Because what's happening in the world is a 1 in 100 year event. We have to take our time to get it right. We've been deliberate and we've been focused on what we're doing, but we've also tried to be agile, and we'll keep doing that and keep finding ways for New Zealand to be able to thrive in what is a really challenging environment. So it is a challenge. It's one that occupies much of my days. I'm not sure if I've had that many sleepless nights, Hayden, because when you sort of fall into bed at midnight and wake up again at 5, there's not much time for sleeplessness, but it is a challenge I think New Zealand is up to. I think it's one that the people of New Zealand have already embraced from a health perspective, and now we turn the he waka e kanoa, we're all in the same waka together towards our economic response, and I look forward to your help and support in that. Kia ora.
So, of course, you're talking about opening the borders or keeping our borders safe. Something that's top of mind in all of the media at the moment is the bubble, the Trans-Tasman bubble. Can we quickly talk about that? I know we hosted the 2 High Commissioners last week and they said, don't ask us for a date. We can't give you a date, Sharon. We heard what the Prime Minister said over the weekend, of course. Is there anything that you wanted to add to those comments today or share with us here today?
It's usually politically limiting to add too much to what the Prime Minister has to say. But to reinforce it, look, you aren't going to get dates out of anybody because of just the insidious nature in many ways of the virus. That is what you're seeing in Melbourne, shows you the difficulty of being able to make that planning as definite as everyone would like it. But to recap, we're having a lot of discussions between both politicians and officials within Australia and New Zealand, and we continue to plan for what it would look like. The Prime Minister kind of outlined in the weekend the framework that we would actually seek to apply to any country with which we were looking to ease border restrictions. That is the absence or near absence of community transmission. To make sure that the places both here in New Zealand and the country we were looking to have those relationships with had quality contact tracing, we had confidence in the testing systems, confidence in the public health systems, and an agreement on the actual nature of people moving across the border, temperature checking, making sure we could separate different types of passengers, etc. So those kind of core criteria we want to apply to any country we might be thinking of having that relationship with. The other question that everybody wants to ask about the Trans-Tasman bubble is, can you do it New Zealand and state by state? Yes. Ultimately, that is a decision for the Australian government. It's not one we can take for them. There are some pretty obvious practical and logistical issues there with the borders between states, and it is a pretty amazing thing, first time in 100 and however many years that New South Wales and Victoria are trying to shut their border. And one of the things I think New Zealanders often don't appreciate is just how big Australia is, and so that border between Victoria and New South Wales is vast. Queensland, they're doing okay, Northern Territory doing okay, WA doing okay, but ultimately we can't dictate that to the Australians, and internally, you've heard Scott Morrison speak publicly about the fact he wants Australia internal borders sorted out before he thinks about anything else. So we'll keep working on it to preempt a question that might get asked as well. Similarly with the Pacific, that's obviously an area where New Zealand has a lot of close relationships. We've got responsibilities to the realm countries, to Niue and the Cooks and Tokelau, which we need to take seriously as well. There are flights going backwards and forwards there that are carrying cargo and also the odd person. But in terms of that two-way travel and being able to do that without the quarantine, there's a bit more work to do.
Sure, thank you. We obviously did a bit of work together at the end of last year around the wellbeing budget, and your office and Treasury have done a whole lot of work, put a whole lot of effort into the wellbeing budget, and there's been a lens across the recovery, of course. So how much do you think the wellbeing budget prepared us perhaps or helped us with the pandemic?
Oh, look, certainly from the way we do our job, absolutely. We applied that wellbeing lens as much as we could to each of the interventions that we were making. An example is making sure that, for example, mental health needs continue to be put right at the top of the agenda. If you're going to have people in their homes for 5 weeks, you obviously have to be acutely aware of what that might mean. The Treasury actually did what I consider to be a really good piece of work with a first cut analysis of the wellbeing impacts of COVID-19, and I mentioned this on Budget Day, I think it was, that they've done that. They've updated it, and it's actually due to be published quite soon on their website, and I think it's a really good piece of work. What it tells you is not exactly rocket science, but it really crystallises it, that the health impacts of COVID-19 you can see in other countries are disproportionately affecting different parts of the population. We've been fortunate not to have had to have dealt with that, but the economic impacts of any recession fall most heavily on those who can least afford it. And we know that, and it's the reason why in the 2 budgets effectively that we've already produced this year, the one we did in March and the real one we did in May, we had a focus on lifting main benefits, doubling the winter energy payment, the food and schools program. So they're all wellbeing type initiatives. I'm sure all of the people here, Sharon, were hanging off every word of mine in the Public Finance Act brackets Wellbeing Amendment Bill, which passed through Parliament last week.
I did have that in my notes.
You were all watching that, I know. But actually that was, for me, a really significant occasion. That was the change to the Public Finance Act to embed the wellbeing objectives in that legislation. So it's effectively to put into law the practice that we had undertaken for Budget 2019. We are, as far as I'm aware, the first country in the world to have that within our public finance legislation. So other countries have separate wellbeing acts in Parliament, but not embedded in the legislation that defines what a Minister of Finance must do in putting the budget together. So that's now passed through Parliament. So whether it's me or anybody else in that seat, they have to be thinking about wellbeing. We didn't define that beyond the broad concepts because we want each government to democratically be able to decide that for us. It's based around the Living Standards Framework and the work that you're aware of. So I think the wellbeing approach will stand the test of time, and I, again, looking around the room, see a number of businesses who've adopted it within what they're doing because it makes sense and it's about who we are as a whole person and a whole community. So it's been very much part of what we've done, but obviously perhaps not in the depth given the speed of decision making that was required.
Yes, thank you. Now we're keen to hear from all of you, of course. Dora, my colleague, has got a microphone, and brilliant, Andrew's got a question.
I'm surprised no one stole it on the way back.
Minister, thank you for all your hard work to date. If I look, and maybe a dated statistic, but there used to be the estimate 500,000 Kiwis around the world. And if I look, there'll be some who are travelling with backpacks, but some very wealthy Kiwis who, coming back home, could add to our economy, both those who could work in employment and those who could employ people. We've seen recently the government, rightly so because of isolation issues, close down the routes back to New Zealand. How do we reopen those in a safe way so we don't become Victoria for the New Zealanders who want to come home, who want to add value to the economy, and will add value to the economy.
Yeah, at the risk of stealing Andrew Curtin's thunder here, we're not shutting the routes down. We're just not taking any new bookings on for the next 3 weeks. And actually, those planes some of them have got quite heavy loadings already on them. So the flights are continuing. It's just we need to moderate the flow in order to be able to match that with the quality isolation facilities that we need. So just to be clear, it's New Zealanders, citizens, permanent residents have a right to return here, but just as it is when you decide you want to come fly to New Zealand from a particular time in normal time, you might not be able to get the flight on the day you want. It's just a little bit of an extension of that for the next few weeks while we get our facilities in place. In terms of the substance of your question, absolutely, and I mean, there is an opportunity here. I think that stat is now probably about 1 million New Zealanders who are offshore. Now, not all of them are going to want to come home. It feels in the last few weeks like most of them do, though. And so, there are some tremendous opportunities there, and we're already starting to see that in terms of people coming and wanting to set up businesses. We're not going to be preferencing people like that. That isn't the way this works. People do have a right to come back here. So the other side of the coin is we have seen a spike in unemployment of people aged between 20 and 29, and that's almost entirely related to abandoned OEs and people coming back to New Zealand. We also have the very particular situation, and I just knew this would carry on being an issue for us, that eligibility in Australia for the range of programs that they've put in place in response to COVID-19 unfortunately continues to reflect the way that they view New Zealanders in Australia. And so can't remember the number now, but a very high percentage of the people we've had coming back so far are actually coming from Australia. And so, that's also, so it cuts both ways, but overall, net gain of a tremendous group of people. And, huge parts of what we want to do is about supporting people to both create their own businesses, and we've got support and funding for small businesses through Embed for that, as well as the overall program of job creation.
Andy Hamilton's got a question.
Oh, g'day, Andy. Is it the one you emailed me the other night that I haven't responded to yet?
Yeah, it might be. If you look at, and maybe I've improved my pitch since I've been giving you a bit of grief about it, but if you think about the quant that you just mentioned, right, there's about 500,000 small businesses in New Zealand. Most of them are sole operators, so there's about 115,000 what we might call bigger than one-person operations. If you look at the quant that was just mentioned about the returning expats, the kids that can't get jobs, this is like 1987. And I think the quant that really interests me is if we go ahead 5 years and we can look back and say, what happened post-COVID? Because if we could get 20, 30,000 people to start businesses and they can keep going, that's 25% increase in the small business population. And New Zealanders are independent. My question on the broad versus narrow policy is what do you do there? Because what I've talked to Stuart about, Nash, he says, look, if they want to start businesses, let them go. We don't want them to start businesses because we told them to do it. But I think there's something in here around digital encouragement, because if they start, then they will learn and then they will become more independent. And, there's nothing wrong working with corporates and working for a corporate. It's amazing. But if we can encourage more for their own future, I think it's a massive number.
Yeah, Andy, and firstly, thank you for the work that you've been doing to support us in this space. And when I was doing the Future of Work piece, 5 years ago now, one of the frames that I put that together under was the idea of building wealth from the ground up. And I do agree with you that that's the opportunity that presents itself here, not just for returning New Zealanders either, but for people who have lost their jobs. And I was in a conversation the other day with somebody. I was about to not say what their occupation was, but then it's Andrew Curtin, so I'm happy to embarrass him. They are a former flight attendant at Air New Zealand, and actually ground crew and flight attendant. And they want to start a small business. That's exactly what they want to do, and it happens to be in the area around greeting cards, flowers. It's like really, really good. I don't want to spoil it because it's a great idea and I don't want them not to have it. And this person was talking to me about exactly that point. So it's New Zealanders who are here, it's New Zealanders who are returning. And I think you've got the genesis of a really good idea. The balance to be struck is between the government enabling this recovery or directing this recovery. And there's a lot of people in this room who don't want us to direct it. They want us to enable it. I think, as ever, the truth lies somewhere in the middle. That actually we've got a significant role to play in helping guide people through that. Accepting, as you more than anyone in this room would know, if we do give grants and establishment funding for that, for small businesses, heaps are going to fail. And that's the reality of what happens. But we should not do it. Exactly, we should not do it because of that.
Yeah.
But it's about making sure we get the balance of that and creating the enabling environment for businesses to flourish. So the reason I hadn't responded to the email is I'm still thinking it through because I think it's a good idea.
Thank you. Hayden's got a question and then
Grant, I think pretty much everyone internationally realises that the response to COVID-19 is a response that requires government investment and spending of money by governments, and we're all Keynesians now. But I was thinking back to a conversation that you and I had late last year around the original infrastructure announcement and the value of spending on lots of small projects that are directly in the community. And so we've got this push for government to spend, and at the same time we've got this tension where local authorities have got a massive shock to their balance sheets, and that they are either unwilling or unable to borrow to fund projects in Rotorua, Gisborne. Auckland has cut, I think, 400 million from its balance sheet. What role can the government play in supporting the balance sheets of local bodies to do that investment?
Yeah, have I got a policy for you? So while you're all sitting here right now, the Prime Minister's in the Hawke's Bay announcing the first phase of our Three Waters investment to the tune of about $750 million. And that's all about developing partnerships with councils to do that work. So that's the non-sexy wastewater, stormwater, drinking water work that was highlighted so horrifically by what happened in Havelock North in terms of drinking water, but in terms of the other two is a massive area of underinvestment from local government. So this is, you'll be able to read all about it, but this is our first effort. There's a little bit of a quid pro quo with the funding, which is around the way we organise ourselves for the delivery of the Three Waters, but it is our contribution there. So that's one example. In terms of the infrastructure projects that we're in the process of announcing at the moment, the $3 billion, again, many of those are partnership projects with local government, including the ones we'll announce here in Auckland. So we genuinely are trying to use our balance sheet practically there. Then there's a bigger picture answer to your question, or two bigger picture answers. The first is the borrowing arrangements for local government, which we have been working with the Reserve Bank on, how that we can support local government to do that. That's defined as ever by the ratings agencies and the way that they view local government. Personally, I've got a view that Auckland is not viewed correctly by the ratings agencies. It's viewed as a city council, where it really is much more akin to what would be a state or provincial government elsewhere in the world, and that's something that needs to be worked on so that their borrowing capacity actually reflects that. But in terms of the local government funding agency, as a shareholder in that, we are committed to making sure that provides support within reason for debt extension for local government, but that's a work in progress, but we are working with them on that. The other question then at a bigger picture level is what local government is able to, I guess, convince its ratepayers of as being important. And I don't know that it's a constructive situation for central government to take that over. I think it is much better a partnership approach. And one of the things we've been attempting to do through the Central Local Government Forum is broker relationships for central local government and iwi, for example, where you've got post-settlement iwi with very significant holdings who could be working in partnership. And Waikato Tainui, great example of the way in which that's happened, and the Ruakura development there is a genuine three-way partnership between central, local government and iwi. So that, to me, would be the other big picture thing, is what other partnerships could we support. But the timing was terrible for local government with COVID, because they were all setting their 10-year plans at exactly the point this hit, and no one wanted to be responsible for double-digit rate increases, unless you were Andrew King, the former Mayor of Hamilton, who's not there anymore.
There's a question at the back, and then we've got one here on there.
Minister, just sort of picking up on some of the comments where questions were asked earlier about the ability to utilise and facilitate the influx of expats coming back into the country, both from an expertise and a capital perspective, in terms of growing the economy. Obviously there's a large number of fairly wealthy, well-experienced foreigners as well, who look at New Zealand in the time, in these sorts of particular times, as being an amazing country to come to, where they want to come and develop their businesses from, bring their families, and look to sort of contribute to the New Zealand economy. Can you pass some comments, or can you make some comments in terms of sort of that immigration piece as well, and how you see that, that ability to harness foreign capital or foreign expertise?
Yeah, obviously in very practical terms, we're just managing the flow of returning New Zealanders at the moment, so that's our initial focus in that regard. In terms of foreign investment, I mean, firstly, you know, New Zealand remains a country that relies on good quality foreign direct investment to be able to do the things that we want to do here. Nothing's changed about that, and it's important that we continue to support and encourage that where it supports our productive economy. We've obviously made some changes about where we thought that was actually about speculation, particularly in the housing market, so we changed policy there. But in terms of productive investment, really important. We just had an announcement last week with Mitsui coming in with their support for the hydrogen development, hydrogen energy developments. There are so many great opportunities there. When you bring it back down to individuals, and the individuals who might also want to migrate here as well as their investment, there are existing settings under which people can apply to do that. We're not proposing to change that. I've heard some proposals that we should, you know, somehow or other take advantage of that now. I think we're better off sticking with the settings we've got, making sure that the investments are quality ones, and making sure that we provide those opportunities for people to, you know, eventually come and live here through the settings, but we're not proposing to change those.
We've got a question here, and then we'll come to you.
Thank you very much. Carmen again from BDT Engineering. Thank you, Hayden, and Dentons KS and the Circle. It's lovely to be here in person. Minister, lovely to hear you speak. What was it? COVID, 4K, 5G, could be a great note. Many of the questions are in the media, and I'm sure that you're starting to get fatigued with the same things that keep emerging. And we are a medium-sized enterprise. We're too big to be in the SME basket. We're too little to be in the big business basket. But we're playing a really significant role in our economic contribution. And my question to you is that classic kind of not ask what your country can do for you, but what we can do for our country. And as business leaders, how can we contribute in a really productive and valuable way to support what is a pretty special business environment at the moment as a refugee in Melbourne?
Well, I'm sorry for your former home to start with. Thank you for that question. And I hope I'm not sounding tired by the questions. Democracy, and we're about to go into 3 months of questions, so all up for it. The thing that strikes me straight away when you talk is a question about confidence. And interestingly, there was a great line in the NZIER quarterly survey of business opinion came out yesterday. And there's a great line about how business confidence had stabilised at -59. And so, like, yes, it had stabilised, and that's a good thing, I guess. But for me, it's about the fact that let's not talk ourselves down. So if there's one request I could make, it is to grab a hold of that privileged position that we are all in, and have some confidence to employ people, essentially. To look to pivot, to use the word, to the opportunities that are here, recognising that there are massive challenges, recognising that some of the international business we might have hoped for isn't here. But holding on to that confidence that we have done well. It's been really fascinating for me going through the process of the last 100 or so days around, the number of people. Just had another person this morning come up to me at another event and say, thank you so much for the wage subsidy. It was so important to our business. We've just paid it back. And they paid it back because actually things hadn't turned out to be as bad as they thought, but it was. And we were very clear about this. The reason we did it the way we did it and the reason we pushed it out the door so fast was confidence and cash flow. And so for that, take that and say that's actually a great thing and keep building that confidence out, knowing that if the worst ever happened, we would be there again, just as we were when we were needed before. So I'll just make that the one ask is grab a hold of that confidence and push out, pivot, employ some more people.
Nice question.
Thank you, Minister. The question I have is around the border and confidence. There are, as you say, about 1 million New Zealanders living overseas, and at the moment our quarantine self-isolation capacity is about 5,000 people every 2 weeks. So it's relatively straightforward to do the maths that says if all those people want to come home, it's going to take us 10 years for those people to come back in our current capacity. Now, you start saying, let's say we double our capacity and only half those people come back, you've still got a wait of 2.5 years. So let's not underestimate the issue of New Zealanders coming back. But my actual question was, I think we do need to think about how we prioritise business, because those people coming back is very much around the social obligation we have, but we're not going to be able to support those people unless we start enabling business travel, which is going to be around a smarter border, and it's going to be about reduced quarantine and self-isolation. So the question I have is, what is the government thinking about how those things are going to be adopted sometime in the next few months?
Yeah. Just to pull apart, just briefly, if I can, the first part of that. I mean, let's be clear, the whole million aren't coming back. And I've got 2 brothers who've lived overseas for more than 20 years, both of them. One of them's thinking about it, the other never would. So, I mean, it's, the numbers aren't quite as large as that. But it doesn't take away from your overall point that the way we're needing to do managed isolation at the moment is resource intensive and time intensive as well. In time, we will have better testing that will enable us to move much quicker. So there's already development around saliva testing that will make this a lot easier. Some fascinating work being done by ESR around looking at how you test the wastewater of aeroplanes, which is a really interesting concept as well. So there are a lot of different ways in which we can speed things up. That would hopefully lead to either very different quarantine arrangements or potentially one day in the future, none. There's also obviously vaccine development, which people are putting a huge amount of effort into as well. So I think all of those things therefore support the creation of that smart border, as do, and I mentioned it when I was answering Sharon's question before, the kind of 5 criteria that we've got around bubbles include that critical element of border management, which is all about how you could move people through much quicker, hopefully with no quarantine in some cases where the country, we're satisfied, has the kind of things we'd expect, or a very much lower intensity quarantine arrangement. So I think all of those things are possible, and they are being worked on, and they're being worked on at the greatest pace that we possibly can. In terms of business travel, the exemption regime still exists, and we have used that, as you'll be well aware, to ensure that certain types of business has been able to be undertaken. The criteria is quite tight at the moment because of the pressure we've got, but it still exists. And as we do grow our capacity, and as we do grow the sophistication of what happens at the border, absolutely we would be looking to see more of that economically significant inbound travel occur.
We've got time for one more question.
I'm going to stick out of business and talk about sport business.
Nice.
All right.
Please.
I'm Rachel Froggatt, Chief Executive Women in Sport Aotearoa, and first of all, just wanted to say on behalf of the network, who are very aware that I'm here speaking to you today, Minister, an enormous thank you from the Women in Sport Network nationally.
I think your positive intervention very early on has stopped a massive backslide for women's sport in New Zealand. I think from the last 12 weeks we've gone from a place where we thought everything was going to collapse and we wouldn't see any women's sport until 2021 to a place where sports organisations are much more confident about bringing the women's sports back. And obviously yesterday a very significant announcement of $80 million into a number of initiatives that will support women in sport. We're lucky enough to be one of what we're calling the Big Four women's sports events coming to New Zealand in the next 3 years. IWG Women in Sport World Conference will be here in Auckland in 2022. And ourselves, alongside the 3 major tournaments, are facing a number of challenges around the border, around operational challenges of bringing delegates, fans, players, administrators into New Zealand. But also, I think it's a huge opportunity economically for us and also to change the landscape for sport. I'd be really interested in your vision post-COVID. What can we do with sport to make sure that the changes we're making for women in sport are permanent and can't be impacted like they potentially would have been 12 weeks ago?
Yeah, great question, Rachel. The first I'd say is it's the opportunity question is massive. I mean, a day does not go by where someone doesn't suggest we host the NFL. Chris, my press secretary, was overwhelmed yesterday with the IPL rumour that took off in India that we were about to host the IPL. There's absolutely no truth to the rumour. It didn't stop that. So, and clearly there are opportunities there for us as we move, to answer the question I just answered before, as we move to a position where we're more confident about that border, then there is real opportunity for us there. In terms of the specific World Cups, and you probably know this already, but we are working very closely with the organisers of both the cricket and rugby ones to make sure their contingency plans are our contingency plans, that we're talking about what sort of isolation arrangements, if they're needed, how we'll manage those. So all of that work goes on, and then we have the excitement of 2023 to look forward to in the FIFA Women's World Cup, which is just, I think the timing of that, thinking about where we might be with vaccines and international travel and so on, is just about perfect. And I think that will be a massive event. I don't think New Zealanders actually get just how big an event that is going to be for us. So we're incredibly excited. And yes, in the middle of all of that is the IWG's World Conference, which we're really looking forward to in 2022. To answer the back end of the question, the way that I can do that as the Minister of Sport is what I've done. I've made it a core element of what I've asked Sport New Zealand to do. It's my number one priority, is to enhance the participation, value and visibility of women and girls in sport. And so every single decision we're making about the sports recovery package has that lens over the top of it. So yesterday when we were announcing some of the support for national leagues, that includes the women's version of basketball, rugby, etc., etc. So absolutely committed to doing that, committed to the governance changes to get ourselves to at least 40%. And we'll just keep following that through. So I think the only way to do it is to be doing what we've been doing. And in fairness to the sporting bodies, the vast majority of them have said yes, we'll do this. They were in the same situation as many businesses have been so uncertain. They were sort of shedding competitions in all directions. We've pulled that back, and we've certainly made clear to those major sports that our support is predicated on them fulfilling the overall goals we have, including on women and girls in sport.
Thank you, Minister. Before I hand over for our vote of thanks, I just wanted to say 2 things. First of all, I convey the best wishes to all of you from our founder and managing director, Johnny Weiss, and our CEO in Australia, Tanya Oziel, and of course, both of them well. Our colleagues in Australia are looking forward to the time when they can come together like we are, and thinking of all of us today, and have been messaging us furiously through this. So just wanted to acknowledge that. And again, just to thank you all for coming and joining us. Great to have our members together. Many of you were speakers for us and on the platform with us over the last 14 weeks, as I said, so thank you for that. Thank you again to Hayden and to Pippa and Carla for hosting us today here at Dentons Kensington Swan, and for your warm hospitality. And the other thing I'll say is in 1 hour's time, you can come and hear from Minister Robertson's colleague, Minister Nash, on our online platform. So you can rush back to your desks and log on for that and ask him all the questions you didn't get across today. So thank you again from the Circle,
Sure.
Minister. Always an honour to host you and appreciate your time today. And I'm now pleased to hand over to Misty Landtroop, Country Director for Palo Alto Networks, who are our newest Prime member in New Zealand, and a brilliant opportunity to welcome them into the family and to have a few words from Misty. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And thank you, Mr. Robertson. That was very insightful. And I'll have to say, I've lived in New Zealand for almost 11 years, and I became a citizen about 3 years ago. And the number one question that I received back home from the States, if you can't tell from my accent, is how did you have the foresight nearly 11 years ago that your new country would handle a pandemic a little bit better than your mother country? So yeah, could have maybe gone to Vegas with that one. But so it's a great pleasure to formally thank you, Minister, for being with us today. And again, I'm a very proud New Zealand citizen. So kia ora koutou katoa. Misty Landtroop again with Palo Alto Networks, and I have the privilege of leading the New Zealand team. And we've just decided to make the investment in New Zealand about a year ago. So in the past, then everything was run for Palo Alto Networks out of Australia, which we know Kiwi companies love that when US multinationals do that. So I thought I would just share, in listening and reflecting upon the comments and discussion that was had, then Minister Robertson mentioned resilience and adaptability as a core kind of Kiwi trait. And Weta Digital is one of our key customers, and it made me think about that as I was listening. And one of the stories, I'm sure some of you read about it in the paper, and they had to, within a 72-hour time frame, shift 1,500 of their crew to work from home. So if some of you know this industry, there's some colorful personalities in this industry that might be a bit challenging. So in the past, to be able to get these folks to be able to do cloud solutions and work from home was quite challenging. Excuse me. So Kathy Gruzis, the Chief Information Officer, who's fantastic, she finally had her dream come true, not the pandemic, but she had the dream come true of being able to actually force a digital transformation. So in the IT industry, I'm sure lots of us have heard the kind of memes and seen all the different things around. Everyone's talked about digital transformation for how many years? 10, 20 years. COVID-19 was a forcing function for digital transformation for lots of us and lots of our customers. So lots of things that were quite cool that happened with that, from lots of projects with Weta. For those of you who have children who care about Disney's Mulan, they completed that over lockdown. And it's something from a kind of a differentiator within New Zealand, where lots of their peers and competitors in London, Vancouver, the States, they weren't able to do that because they didn't have the luxury that we did. And so I think that's something that's an enormous privilege that we need to all probably reflect on a bit. And we were just really proud from Palo Alto Networks' perspective that we were able to keep all of those crews secure and be able to help with all of the data and IP and help make that a very successful transition for them. So again, thank you for coming today, and we really appreciate all the support from the Business Circle. And for those of you who are going to be back again in 3D, then look forward to seeing you again. And everyone should stick around and do some networking, and I think we'll be here for another 10 minutes or so. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you.